The VIP enclosure at the famous Berkshire Racecourse represents far more than just premium viewing. This architectural space acts as a living embodiment of Britain's constitutional pecking order. For centuries, reigning monarchs and global titans have occupied this exact territory. Consequently, infiltrating the primary tier without documented sovereign authorization constitutes much more than bad manners. Such behavior represents a calculated assault on the monarchy's foundations. The entire royal apparatus hinges on visual dominance, specifically proximity and placement. These arrangements are governed by ironclad, centuries-old decrees, not fleeting preferences. Yet, on a perfectly manicured afternoon, an unprecedented breach occurred inside that historical stronghold. While thousands of unaware spectators gathered outside and global broadcasters awaited their entry, a meticulously orchestrated conflict was quietly erupting behind the oak-paneled walls of the royal sanctuary. Heavy floral perfumes mixed with the palpable anxiety of palace courtiers. Crucially, this invasion was not orchestrated by a hostile political faction or a demanding foreign diplomat. The mastermind lacked any constitutional relevance, security clearance, or formal title. The architect was Tom Parker Bowles, the civilian son of Queen Camilla. Behind the velvet drapes of Buckingham Palace, an aggressive, stealthy operation had been brewing for months leading up to this exact day. The overarching goal was breathtakingly subversive. Injecting the Queen's non-working relatives into the epicenter of spaces exclusively meant for sworn servants of the state, it was a stealthy push to normalize a civilian bloodline right beneath the watchful eyes of the institution's traditionalists. Calibrating the seating arrangements requires weeks of agonizing precision from the master of the household's team. It is an uncompromising mathematical equation where every single chair symbolizes the immense weight of royal duty. During this particular event, the most coveted front-tier positions were strictly reserved for the relentless engines of King Charles's reign. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, alongside the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, these dedicated figures have surrendered decades of their lives to unglamorous public service, functioning impeccably without complaint. They do not merely appear for champagne and flashbulbs. Instead, they serve as the indispensable cogs keeping the monarchical machine running through eras of both turbulence and calm. Ejecting them from their earned positions is inconceivable. Consequently, physically usurping their allocated chairs is tantamount to declaring open warfare on the fundamental, unspoken doctrines of the Windsor dynasty. Nevertheless, as senior royals prepared to arrive, the unimaginable unfolded. Bypassing bewildered security personnel, Tom Parker Bowles confidently strode through the heavy oak entrances with a group of extended relatives in tow. He completely ignored the official seating diagrams mounted in the entryway. He offered no acknowledgement to the protocol staff guarding the perimeter. Let me ask you, viewers, should members of a blended family inherently receive the exact same treatment as those born into the monarchy? Tell me yes or no below. His gait was entirely unbothered, radiating the extreme entitlement of an individual who genuinely believed he was above the rules. Deliberately abandoning his actual ticketed zone, a perfectly respectable, non-working guest tier situated at the very back of the enclosure, he forged a direct path toward the most premium sector. He aimed for the precise airspace dedicated to the king's blood relatives. This maneuver was entirely premeditated. It was a visual hijacking intended for global broadcast the second the event commenced. If international media captured Tom casually lounging among working royals, the public narrative would instantaneously transform. The world would perceive him as an integral pillar of the crown, effectively rewriting the British state's visual hierarchy in one afternoon. And this audacious territorial grab was not solely his idea. Queen Camilla provided the invisible backing for this maneuver. Operating entirely off the grid, she had circumvented the standard palace administration. She issued clandestine, last-minute commands to household staff, insisting her offspring take precedence over the sovereign's own brothers and sisters. Leveraging her recently acquired status, it was a colossal overstep designed to cement a highly visible legacy for her personal lineage. The immediate result was administrative paralysis. A multitude of communication directors, military generals, and seasoned courtiers stared in utter shock. They remained frozen while a civilian party commandeered the most heavily guarded, symbolic territory within British elite society. Suddenly, the staff were trapped between two impossible directives: the monarch's officially sanctioned blueprint finalized weeks prior, and the Queen's contradictory back-channel demands delivered at the 11th hour. A hostile infiltration was unfolding at a glacial pace. Non-working guests were taking over the designated spots of individuals who had surrendered their entire lives to the crown. The atmosphere grew poisonous instantly. Frantic whispers buzzed through the radios of protection officers. The immaculate schedule was on the verge of total collapse due to this unsanctioned occupation. The Queen's family was on the precipice of securing their ultimate visual triumph. Their only remaining task was to sit tight and let the incoming television crews document their ascension. Taking his stolen seat, Tom watched his entourage fan out to claim the rest of the premier territory. He was completely convinced the takeover had succeeded. In his mind, the immense new authority of his mother acted as an impenetrable shield against any institutional pushback. He presumed the protocol staff were simply too polite and far too frightened of the Queen's wrath to create a scene before the VIPs arrived. He could not have been more mistaken. During his brief window of perceived victory, Tom Parker Bowles forgot one crucial reality. The heart of the monarchy operates on ruthless military precision, not modern blended family sentimentality. He foolishly believed he had outmaneuvered the well-mannered men in morning suits, assuming the firm's ancient laws no longer governed his existence. Yet, he was completely oblivious to the fact that his audacious march had been tracked the very second he entered the room. A highly trained military veteran was monitoring the breach, a man who cared nothing for Tom's maternal ties, and who answered to a far more formidable, uncompromising power within the institution. Stepping purposefully from the darkened private corridors, a figure of iron resolve advanced toward the frontier. The room's ambient chatter abruptly plummeted into a suffocating dead silence. Tom Parker Bowles had unknowingly walked straight into a perfectly laid snare. The individual emerging from the shadows was no public relations specialist hired to massage fragile egos. He was the uncompromising sword of the sovereign's will, Major Tom Thompson. As King Charles's fiercely respected, ultra-disciplined equerry, Thompson had built his entire legacy on absolute loyalty to the crown and flawless execution of commands. Social climbing meant nothing to him. His only currency was protocol, and protocol knows no mercy. Closing the gap toward the stolen territory, the Major's gaze remained fixed on the civilian group lounging in spots meant for the working bloodline. He identified the catastrophic breach immediately. This wasn't a minor seating mistake. It was a full-scale assault on the system dictating who legally represents the state. Moving in total silence with a rigid posture, Thompson halted precisely 2 feet away from the Queen's son, exuding an icy, unyielding dominance that no corporate boardroom could ever teach. Consider the intense psychological weight of that standoff. On one flank sat a man intoxicated by his mother's newfound supreme authority. On the opposing flank stood a traditionalist enforcer who had faced actual combat. Thompson did not shout or create unnecessary theater. Leaning forward just enough to pierce the quiet murmurs of the elite crowd, he delivered one devastatingly simple fact. He calmly informed Tom that his legitimate seat resided in the non-working guest section at the rear of the enclosure. It was a straightforward, reasonable statement of objective reality based on the official blueprint. Tom Parker Bowles' reaction was anything but reasonable. Instead of gracefully accepting the correction or offering a polite apology for the supposed confusion, he unleashed a furious, aggressive outburst that shattered the room's refined aura. His face reddened with blazing indignation. Nearby witnesses watched in paralyzed terror as the Queen's civilian offspring began vocally attacking the professional competence of a decorated soldier. Tom hurled insults at Thompson's credentials, shouting that the equerry was utterly clueless about his duties. He accused the veteran of dangerously disrupting the event's logistics by inciting pointless friction. Why would someone lacking any constitutional standing act with such reckless hubris? Because he felt certain he possessed the ultimate override code to the palace machinery. Mid-tantrum, Tom played his final card, exposing the true motive behind the infiltration. He loudly announced that the seating adjustment was a direct personal order from the Queen herself. Staring down the senior equerry, Tom warned him that opposing her will was a career-ending catastrophe. Consider the sheer audacity of that moment. A food critic holding absolutely no state authority threatening to destroy a seasoned military officer's livelihood for enforcing the king's official household laws. This demonstrated the mindset of someone completely convinced he had sovereign protection to annihilate any opposition. Tom wasn't requesting a favor. He was demanding total submission. He fully anticipated that the Major would cower, beg for forgiveness, and retreat into the shadows to preserve his job. However, Major Thompson did not blink, nor did he cower. He remained anchored like an immovable fortress against a chaotic, flailing tempest. His expression stayed entirely blank, revealing zero intimidation. As the threat of professional destruction failed to register on the equerry, Tom's fiery rage morphed into visible panic. His mother's invincible title was failing him. He was rapidly losing control of the situation in front of Britain's most powerful elites. In a desperate bid to crush the veterans' resistance, Tom reached inside his tailored coat and produced his smartphone. Tapping frantically on the screen, he loudly declared he was calling Queen Camilla directly. His violent strategy was straightforward: get the sovereign consort on speakerphone to verbally obliterate the major before the entire royal staff. He never got the opportunity to initiate the call. Relying on pure tactical instinct, Major Thompson eliminated the final inch of space. He reached forward and physically snatched the mobile device straight out of Tom's grasp. The veteran terminated the call mid-dial, leaving the screen completely black. The resulting silence was absolutely deafening. A senior equerry had deemed it entirely necessary to forcibly disarm the Queen's adult son to thwart an attack on the official state apparatus. This went far beyond standard rule enforcement. It was a visceral emergency maneuver against an active, hostile threat. Holding the confiscated device at his side, Thompson delivered a brutally transparent message. There would be no maternal rescues, and back-channel interventions were dead. The firm's regulations applied to everyone. What began as a tense standoff exploded into absolute administrative pandemonium. Confiscating the device severed Tom's lifeline, yet it failed to crush his defiance. Palace staff were now trapped in a horrific crossfire between Queen Camilla's whispered front-row demands and the king's unyielding official enforcement. Courtiers exchanged panicked, terrified stares while security earpieces buzzed with frantic tactical updates. The room transformed into a boiling pressure cooker. Digging his heels in deeper, Tom elevated his voice, screaming that he absolutely refused to take orders from mere servants. That specific word laid bare the foundational psychology of the Parker Bowles faction. It showcased their fundamental disrespect for the elite professionals dedicating their lives to the crown's survival, viewing them merely as disposable obstacles. Recognizing that quiet diplomacy had completely failed, Major Thompson escalated the response. He raised a hand, delivering a sharp, definitive signal to the royal protection officers guarding the perimeter. These were the heavy hitters personnel specifically trained to physically neutralize threats against the monarchy. As the security unit advanced toward the premium tier, the air inside the royal box became suffocating. The meticulously curated afternoon was mere seconds away from a catastrophic, highly public detonation. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the enclosure swung wide open. The timing possessed an almost cinematic quality. Just as the security squad closed in on the Queen's son at the absolute peak of his humiliation, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, made their perfectly timed formal entrance. The room's temperature instantly plummeted to freezing. The frantic radio static vanished, and the terrified murmurs of the courtiers evaporated. The overwhelming gravitational presence of the future king halted everyone in their tracks. William's gaze rapidly scanned the chaotic environment. He registered the usurped chairs, the civilian party's hostile stance, and his trusted major gripping a confiscated smartphone. He diagnosed the entire institutional breach in a mere fraction of a second. Visibly disheveled, red-faced, and watching his grand takeover crumble, Tom Parker Bowles made a disastrous tactical error. Instead of demonstrating remorse, de-escalating the situation, or quietly retreating to avoid the heir's fury, he doubled down on his arrogance. In a shocking breach of royal boundaries, Tom awkwardly attempted to leverage his perceived status by addressing William as a brother. Whining loudly to the Prince of Wales, he pointed an accusing finger at the advancing protection team and Major Thompson. He complained that the staff failed to recognize their masters, claiming the Queen's relatives were being handled like common trespassers. Staring directly at England's future monarch, Tom demanded immediate intervention. He expected William to publicly humiliate the security detail, overrule the senior equerry, and reinstate the civilian group into the front row. Tom genuinely assumed that the facade of blended family unity would compel William to support him simply to avoid a scandalous public scene. Prince William offered no argument. He did not elevate his voice, nor did he entertain any debate regarding modern hospitality or family dynamics. The prince did not utter a single word. He simply froze, his jaw tightly clenched, his features morphing into a mask of terrifying, impenetrable steel. This was far from the genial, smiling royal seen at charity engagements. This was the pure, unyielding power of a future sovereign protecting the absolute sanctity of his lineage's constitutional purpose. Standing right beside him, Catherine maintained flawless composure. Her face offered a masterclass in untouchable elegance, betraying zero internal alarm, yet her eyes locked intensely onto the security squad. Her silent directive was crystal clear. Shifting his gaze from Tom's flushed, demanding expression to Major Thompson, William delivered one barely perceptible nod. No negotiations, no spoken commands, no compromises. That microscopic gesture served as the ultimate death blow to the Parker Bowles faction's grand ambitions. The underlying message was unmistakable. There would be no special privileges, no salvation, and absolutely zero tolerance for civilian overreach within his domain. Moving with terrifying clinical efficiency, the protection officers took action. They did not politely escort Tom by the elbow. Instead, they seized him with a firm, undeniable physical grip. The sheer degradation of the moment was profound. The reigning queen's own flesh and blood was bodily hauled out of the premier section, treated not as a revered VIP, but as a hostile intruder who had infiltrated a secure military zone. They dragged him completely out of the royal enclosure, marching him past empty, stolen chairs and horrified courtiers. Before the outer gates could even open to the public, he was aggressively cast into the rear corridors, completely banished from the official arena. The physical removal was brutal, silent, and incredibly swift. The International Press Corps was literally mere seconds away from aiming their massive telephoto lenses directly at the royal box. Had the extraction lasted even 30 seconds longer, the defining global image of the year would have featured the Queen's son being forcefully ejected from the racecourse. The visual hierarchy of the British state was violently preserved, and total catastrophe was averted by the narrowest of margins. However, the true explosion was only just commencing. As Tom was shoved into the shadows, the shockwaves of the altercation ripped through the palace's internal communication networks. Physically assaulting and evicting the child of a reigning consort instantly triggers a catastrophic internal war. Messengers sprinted toward the private holding suites as panicked whispers flooded the back corridors. Isolated deep within the complex in her flawlessly curated dressing room, Queen Camilla absorbed the devastating news. She received a granular report detailing the brutal eviction, the seized mobile device, the total degradation of her family, and most enraging of all, the single, silent nod from Prince William that greenlit the entire physical takedown. Her response was absolutely devoid of sorrow. It was purely white-hot, radioactive rage. This fury was on the verge of shattering the Windsor family's fragile public illusion, threatening to ignite a historic constitutional meltdown on the world stage. If you found the physical extraction unbelievable, wait until you hear about the catastrophic revenge she tried to pull off on live television. You will not believe the unprecedented stunt Queen Camilla pulled minutes after this clash, nor the terrifying new laws King Charles had to enact to stop her. Stay tuned, because the true battle for the throne is about to be dragged into the light. Typically, the Queen Consort's private holding suite functions as an untouchable sanctuary, a haven of hushed whispers, perfectly controlled temperatures, and meticulous grooming. However, the moment the breathless messenger crossed the doorway with the horrific update from the enclosure, that peaceful sanctuary exploded. The information did not just arrive, it detonated like a bomb. Behind closed doors, the environment instantly became venomous. Pacing the room with her most loyal advisors, Camilla fiercely dissected the humiliation. Her camp immediately labeled Major Thompson and the Prince of Wales as dangerously inflexible, excessively brutal, and completely oversensitive. The narrative radiating from Camilla's team relied heavily on the concept of modern hospitality. They argued that during a deeply vulnerable era, while King Charles endured grueling medical treatments for severe health issues, projecting a unified, blended family was not just pleasant, it was vital. From her perspective, placing her civilian children in the monarchy's premier spaces was not a calculated power grab, but rather a necessary emotional anchor for a sick sovereign. It sounded perfectly logical on the surface. A loving family rallying during a medical crisis. However, the palace traditionalists easily saw through this emotional smokescreen. They recognized the underlying motive, identifying it as a calculated exploitation of the king's weakened state to permanently rewrite the rules of royal precedence. Retaliation became the Queen's immediate objective. Her inner circle rapidly drafted an uncompromising mandate demanding a formal, swift apology from the Prince of Wales alongside severe disciplinary action against Major Thompson for his aggressive tactics. This royal ultimatum was dispatched down the corridors. The reply from Prince William's faction was chillingly brief: total silence. There would be no negotiations and no apologies. The future king had drawn an immovable line in the sand, and he refused to concede a single inch. Facing this outright rejection proved to be the absolute breaking point. Realizing her secret directives had been forcefully crushed and her tactical advantage destroyed, the queen executed a maneuver that sent seismic tremors through the royal institution. She abandoned her position entirely. In an action virtually unseen in modern royal history, the reigning queen consort walked out of the monarchy's most critical annual social event. Bypassing the official departure schedule and offering no polite excuses, she immediately summoned her motorcade. This abrupt, unscheduled flight threw the entire afternoon into administrative pandemonium. Security teams had to rapidly scramble to alter their extraction protocols while staff frantically readied the vehicles. By fleeing the grounds, Camilla effectively weaponized her absence, signaling a profound personal vendetta against the future king. Most damaging of all, her sudden disappearance left the crown entirely vulnerable to vicious public speculation at the exact moment it desperately required a facade of ironclad unity. The vacuum created by her rapid exit was immense. Thousands of attendees packed the grandstands, while global media lenses remained fixated on the royal enclosure. As the glaringly empty seats became obvious to the cameras, rumors began to ripple through the elite audience. Whispers of a catastrophic internal fracture echoed across the manicured grounds. This was the precise moment Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped directly into the line of fire. While the palace's internal gears ground into a state of hyperventilating panic, Catherine exhibited a masterclass in psychological discipline, single-handedly holding the monarchy's public illusion intact. She instinctively grasped her core constitutional assignment: immediate damage control. She needed to blind the world to the structural fractures rapidly destroying the royal foundation. As the Queen's entourage fled and created a massive authority vacuum, Catherine intentionally monopolized the attention of every surrounding camera. She displayed zero anger and zero distress. Instead, her expression remained a serene, untouchable mask of grace. Observing her movements revealed a brilliant strategy. She effortlessly smiled at VIP guests, engaged warmly with racing officials, and preserved the afternoon's traditional, unhurried rhythm, as if a violent extraction had not just occurred a few feet away. Her graceful conduct was absolutely not a sign of submission. Rather, it served as a highly calculated, strategic shield built to minimize immediate PR damage, buying the palace communications team a crucial window to control the narrative. However, one must not confuse her calm public diplomacy with actual neutrality. Catherine completely aligned with her husband's intense disgust over the Parker Bowles family's unauthorized ascension. She firmly believed the premier tier belonged solely to the working core. Yet her tactical approach contrasted sharply with William's instinctive, hardline aggression. While William was ready to let his cold rage burn bridges, Catherine focused purely on the institution's long-term survival. She understood that a visible, open conflict on a global stage would inflict permanent damage on the crown's prestige. She held the line with flawless precision, allowing the media to capture images of a radiant princess seemingly oblivious to the civil war raging in the background. But as the afternoon concluded and the immediate PR disaster was narrowly avoided, the conflict shifted from the public lawns to the heavily fortified war rooms of Buckingham Palace. Behind those locked doors, a terrifying new player was preparing to enter the battlefield. Whenever Princess Anne enters a conflict, the monarchy's entire atmospheric pressure undergoes a drastic shift. She isn't just a disgruntled relative holding a grudge. She serves as the ultimate, uncompromising guardian of institutional integrity. She embodies the relentless discipline forged by her late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. In Princess Anne's eyes, the disastrous events at the racecourse were far beyond a petty family dispute. They represented absolute sacrilege. The late queen had deeply cherished this specific event, viewing it not as a playground for civilian social climbers, but as the ultimate manifestation of royal duty and unbreakable structural hierarchy. Allowing non-working relatives to physically usurp the seats of sworn state servants was, to Anne, an unforgivable insult to the 7 decades of devotion her mother had modeled. The Princess Royal did not mask her immense fury behind diplomatic pleasantries. She engaged the crisis like a precision military strike. Deep within the palace corridors, Anne initiated a series of incredibly tense, high-level confrontations, directly targeting the senior advisors operating Queen Camilla's office. She never raised her voice to a shout. Instead, she utilized a tone of piercing, freezing authority that annihilated every single excuse they presented. Witnesses recalled a terrifying dressing down where Anne explicitly condemned the civilian entourage's behavior as a highly dangerous, unacceptable violation of protocol. When one senior courtier tried to interject by mentioning the king's need for blended family warmth, Anne shut the argument down instantly. Her rebuttal was devastatingly blunt. The family's current internal struggles demanded stricter discipline, not less. Elevating non-working civilians into the institution's symbolic epicenter established a toxic precedent that would inevitably destroy the crown's structural foundation. By lending her massive, unassailable moral weight to Prince William's camp, Anne violently flipped the power dynamics within the palace. The traditionalist faction now held an overwhelming, decisive advantage. The Queen's advisors could no longer brush off the physical extraction as the oversensitivity of a younger royal. They were now facing an impenetrable, united front, consisting of the heir to the throne and the nation's most respected working royal. King Charles III found himself completely cornered. For months, he had desperately clung to absolute neutrality, attempting to broker peace between his son's rigid protocol enforcement and his wife's dynastic ambitions. However, neutrality was no longer a viable option for survival. The private squabble had mutated into a massive constitutional crisis fueled by the physical removal, the public walkout, and his sister's furious intervention that threatened to completely derail his reign's stability. Forced to take action, his resulting decision was devastatingly permanent. By the first days of the following month, the monarch officially enacted a highly restrictive administrative decree that sent shockwaves across the establishment. Insiders dubbed it the slimmed-down mandate. This was not a gentle guideline, it was codified royal law. The new directive explicitly mandated that only official working royals, individuals who have sworn formal constitutional oaths and dedicated their lives to state service, were legally permitted to occupy the monarchy's core, symbolic territories. Official state portraits, the Buckingham Palace balcony, the central rows of the royal box, and all premier locations were now strictly reserved for the family's working core. This mandate thoroughly dismantled the Queen's strategy of gradual integration, guaranteeing in writing that civilian relatives could never again displace the Crown's official representatives. Furthermore, the mandate extended far beyond seating charts. The King aimed targeted, punitive measures directly at Tom Parker Bowles. For months, Tom had leveraged his maternal ties to boost his own public profile, frequently acting as an unsanctioned commentator on national broadcasts. He had been discreetly leaking intimate details regarding palace logistics and the king's health, deliberately branding himself as a royal insider. The new mandate severed this pipeline entirely. Royal orders placed a non-negotiable, absolute gag order on Tom's media access. He was explicitly banned from discussing institutional policy, palace logistics, or royal health on any public forum. Any violation would result in a public disavowal. This swift crackdown brutally stripped him of his perceived authority, reinforcing an impenetrable steel barrier between the Queen's private family and the royal institution. Yet, the King's final maneuver was the ultimate bombshell. To guarantee this brand of infiltration could never occur again, King Charles established a rigorous, mandatory approval protocol for all future royal guest lists. He officially mandated that the Queen Consort's office must submit every single proposed invitation for non-royal family members to a higher authority for final review and consent. That absolute final veto power was handed directly to the Prince of Wales.